Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to my video on the 13th Tale read-along, which by the time you're seeing this will have just finished, but the time I'm filming is just starting. I thought I would do something slightly different with this read-along, and rather than making just one video at the end, I would make a kind of chapter-by-chapter review as I go through and sort of record my thoughts every day of the read-along. So not exactly a vlog, but I guess kind of more vlog style. Recently, Claudia from Spencer's Library did a review of Rebecca like this, where she kind of recorded her thoughts after every chapter, and I found it really interesting, so I thought I would do it here. This video is going to be very spoilery, so if you haven't read this book, maybe don't watch it. So it's Monday the 16th of September, and I've just read the first two chapters of the 13th Tale, both of which I really, really enjoyed. I love the 13th Tale a lot. It is one of my absolute favourite books, and it's so nice to, read a book that I love and have loved for a very long time. I guess because I don't get this kind of nostalgia with books that aren't classics very often. Like, a lot of the books I read as a teenager and fell in love with were classics. There are very few adult fiction books that I read as a teenager or sort of read before I was 18, 19. So most of the books I feel nostalgic about are classics or I guess children's books. And it's quite rare for me to have an adult literary / commercial fiction book that I feel really nostalgic about when I read it. This is my third reading of the 13th Tale, and it just gives me such warm feelings inside, partly because I love it a lot and I feel nostalgic and so on, and also because it's so beautifully written and because it's a book about loving books. I love the first two chapters. The very first chapter with the opening of the letter is so intriguing and brilliant. I think it's just superbly paced, such a brilliant opening before you know anything about Margaret Lee or Vida Winter. I keep calling her Viva, that's not her name. To just get that letter and to read Vida's writing first is so magical. And then that second chapter describing Margaret's life and upbringing, her time in the bookshop, which I love, the descriptions of the bookshop and its role in her life and her identity is just amazing. And then her talking about discovering that she had a twin who died. It's just so good. I love this book a lot. I'll check back in tomorrow, I guess, with more thoughts. Rereading an old favourite like this fills me with such a warm feeling because it's familiar and I know it, but also it's really exciting to read it again because it's such a good book and I love it. It's going to be a very excited video, I'm sorry. Right, moving on to tomorrow. Hello, I'm back with another update for the 13th Tale, which I have been reading quite a lot of. It's actually Thursday. I have skipped a few days, but I haven't read Thursday's chapters yet, so I'm just up to, I think, page 103, which is Merrily and the Perambulator, and I am loving it so much. There's something so lovely about rereading an old favourite, especially one you haven't read for years. There are so many passages in the 13th Tale that are absolutely beautiful. I love the way she writes about books and Margaret's love of books and Vida Winter's love of storytelling, and I love the story that Vida tells. I love how she says that she will tell a ghost story, and then she kind of does. She talks in the beginning about her birth being a subplot, and of course that's the point. It is. It's really interesting. Obviously, I've read it before, I know what happens, and by the time you're watching this video, I hope you do too. Otherwise, you shouldn't be watching it. But reading the discussion board on Goodreads and seeing what everyone thinks about it is really, really interesting, especially because I know all the twists, and I know that Vida isn't, her character isn't present yet. It's so interesting. It's such a clever twist, and I love seeing how it's set up and hinted at earlier in ways that you would never quite clock. It's just really, really fun. I also love the Wuthering Heights references in it, which I don't think I had realised quite how explicit they were until this reading, possibly because I've reread Wuthering Heights quite recently. But the Charlie-Isabel relationship within the story, I think is very much like Cathy Heathcliff. And obviously it's not literal incest in Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff is her foster brother, not her biological brother. But I definitely think in the kind of incestuous relationship between Isabel and Charlie, you do see quite a lot of hints of Wuthering Heights. I think Isabel as a character does come across as being quite like Cathy, she is spoilt and wild, but also wants to be more ladylike than the rest of her family. Charlie is sort of out of society and doesn't really understand how to behave in similar ways to Heathcliff. And also I feel in the relationships between Isabel and Charlie and then Roland and Sabella, Roland and Sabella come across as quite like the Lintons in Wuthering Heights, I would say. And then Roland dies really, really suddenly in the same way that so many characters do in Wuthering Heights. In so many ways it feels like a book meant for me because it has so many references to classics and is so involved with Victorian literature. But yet it is a modern book. I think one of the reasons why I love it and why it has such a strong hold on me is because it was one of the first books I read where I was this is the kind of thing I want to write, and really influence my sort of writing and my interest. Because as a teenager, I wrote a lot of fiction, but I mostly wrote fantasy, which wasn't what I read. When I think of a lot of my other favourite novels, stuff like Dickens and Jane Austen, I love them, obviously, but I don't want to write like that because I don't live in the 19th century. And obviously, like, I do take inspiration from people like Dickens and Jane Austen when it comes to writing. But actually, The 13th Tale was one of the first books when I read it, and I was like, oh yes, this is the place that I want to write. This is like the area of the market that I want to write in. This is the kind of thing I want to write. So that was quite very like influential as well. So it makes me really excited, not only as a reader but as a writer, because I feel like so interested in the way it does things. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, I'm enjoying it very much, and I will check back in again later today or tomorrow. So I thought I would check in again on my thoughts on the 13th Tale. It's Saturday, so I'm not doing so well in my effort to do these every day, but maybe every few days is fine. Otherwise it would be a very, very long video. So I'm just loving the 13th Tale. I can't express my like enjoyment of it enough. It's such a good book. Such a good book. It's very nice to read it and know that my opinion is still confirmed, that I still think it's amazing, and I love like reading it. Like it's so rereadable, because knowing the twist, I can like spot all the little things, like all the little clues that there is a third child in that house, all the little ghosts, the kind of makeshift bed in the library with the copy of Jane Eyre, the discussions about Adeline and the girl in the mist. Like, it's not because Adeline seems to have two people in her, it's because it's literally two children who are swapping in the classroom because they look so similar. Like, it's so interesting. Discussions of the person Hester thinks is a little boy in the garden who is actually Vida Winter. I think some of my favourite clues are the clues that are kind of given before we even get into the story. Vida says that her birth is a subplot. She says that she's going to tell Margaret a ghost story. She does tell a ghost story, and her birth is a subplot to the story she tells. And also, when Margaret says that she's going to ask Vida for 3 facts, she can confirm that Vida talks about how the magic number is 3, and there's this constant reference, like, throughout the book to how 3 is, like, a magic number, and that's because there are, like, 3 children at Angelfield, so it's also, like, all the things. It's just so good. It's so good. I love Hester as a character as well now, the governess. I think she's absolutely amazing. Such an interesting character, so, like, clever and resourceful. Another clue, in fact, just thinking of that, is we're told by Hester in sort of Vida's narrative that Adeline hates Hester and resents her in the house, whereas Vida tells Margaret that she really liked Hester. So we know already that that's not quite right. So I think when you read it for the first time, you think Hester's just got it wrong, or you think that like Vida/Adeline is a complicated person, and that when she's like concentrating, she likes her. Whereas actually, like, it's because they're 2 different people. It's so clever. It's so clever. I love it. I love it so much, and it's so like. Such an enjoyable read, so well written, so brilliant. We met Aurelius in the last few chapters, and I love Aurelius so much. I think he's such a great and enjoyable and nice character. Like, I watched the TV film adaptation a little while ago, and it was enjoyable, but it was not a patch on the book. And one of the reasons why it really didn't work for me is because they cut Aurelius, so I thought that was such a shame, because I think he's such a good character, and so, like, important to the narrative, and to, like, Margaret getting some good/kindness from it as well, like, because Aurelius, like, she makes a friend, and she doesn't often make friends, and that's nice. And yeah, okay, it's gonna be a long ramble, so I'm gonna go read some more of the 13th Tale, and I will keep you updated with my thoughts as we go on. I love it so much. It's so well written and beautiful and fantastic with all the themes I love. And yeah, okay, gonna go now. Hello, it's time for another 13th Tale check-in. So it is Monday, and I am up to page 256, I think, so just over halfway through now, or a bit more than halfway through, actually, yeah. Oh, and it's so good. I love this book a lot. It's really interesting, actually, rereading it, and noticing things I haven't noticed before, but also kind of reevaluating my memory of it. For example, I could have sworn that Hester was present for much more of it. And it's really interesting, because I think part of the reason why is because she's such a strong character. She exerts like a really big influence over the book, but actually she's not in it for that many chapters. And in my head, she was in it for like a good third of the book, which is not. So that was interesting. And also like just reading over the stuff with Aurelius, who I really like as a character. And I think his kind of plot line and how it feeds into Miss Winters is really, really interesting, especially in terms of, I just got past the point where he tells Mrs. Love's story, the story of how his foster mother found him. And obviously, I'm reading it again, I know that he is Emmeline's child, but also I know that he is the young man in the letter from the beginning who approaches Vida Winter and asks for the truth, because it's his truth. And he wasn't sent by a newspaper. And like, there's actually quite a lot of clues to that in a way. In the way Vida Winter describes him, but also in the fact, like, when Margaret Lee goes to look up in the Bradbury Herald, she can't find that article, and she can't find any, like, book pages. It doesn't seem likely that anyone in this town would have sent someone on an errand to, like, ask Vida Winter for the truth. But the only person in this town who might have done that is Aurelius, if he had worked out that she used to live at Angelfield. I'm just really, really enjoying it. I love the way it's written, and I love spotting all the, like, clues up to the twist. especially in the way, like, Vida Winter in her story, you think on the first read that she's swapping back between first and third person, sometimes using I and sometimes referring to Adeline in the third person, whereas actually when she says Adeline, she means Adeline. When she says I, she means myself, because she's not Adeline. It's so clever. It's so good. I would like to know if anyone guessed the twist, because I didn't guess the twist. And the first time I read this, I was like, it's just the best twist I've ever read in a book. I've never been so, like, simultaneously surprised and, like, delighted by the fact that it made complete sense. And I was like, oh, yes, it's a perfect twist. The one that you don't see coming, but when it happens, you're like, oh yes, I understand everything now. It was good. Anyway, more in a few days. Right, so it's Thursday, the 27th of September, and I must confess that I may have accidentally finished the 13th Tale. I didn't mean to, I was intending to read along with my own schedule that I set, but then it's just so good. And even though I've read it twice before and I know what happens, I was just really, really eager to, like, get to the twist. So my plan yesterday, reading on the train, was just to read up to that, like, brilliant, perfect moment, Margaret's Eureka, where she says, once upon a time there were 2 baby girls, or alternatively, once upon a time there were 3. It's probably, like, my favourite moment in any book ever. Because I just think it's the best twist. I think it's the best twist. So my intention was to read up to that point and then, like, wait a day and read the rest, because I thought I wouldn't feel the need to read on after I'd got to that bit, like, immediately. But then I got to that bit and then I immediately felt the need to read on, and then I finished it unintentionally. Had another book in my bag I was intending to read yesterday, which I did not. I just finished off this and then, like, wept a little bit on the train. Just a little bit. It's just so good, though. I just love it an awful, awful lot. There are a couple of things I want to discuss having reached the end of the book. One thing I wanted to talk about, which I've never been able to mention about this book on this channel because it's a spoiler, is how much I love the cover of this book, because the clue, like, the twist is on the cover, like, because there are 2 girls on the cover, and then there's a girl on the back, and you'll think it's one of the girls from the front, but her feet are different, because it's a different child. Because on the front of the book, you have Emmeline and Adeline, and on the back of the book, you have Miss Winter. It's so clever. I love it. I'm sorry, but I get very excited because I think this is, like, the cleverest book cover I have ever seen. So there's that. Another thing I want to discuss is when this book is set, because quite a few people were, like, speculating about this on the Goodreads group, and I think it is really interesting. And some people are speculating it's like 70s, 80s. Obviously, no internet, no mobile phones, no digital cameras. But also, I do think it's important to remember that both Margaret and Vida are quite, like, old-fashioned people who like old-fashioned things. I don't, like, Margaret doesn't strike me as the person who's going to have a mobile phone in the beginning of mobile phones. She strikes me as someone who's not going to get a mobile phone until everybody else has a mobile phone. But anyway, what I wanted to talk about with this is that I think you can kind of work it out, because we know that Vida Winter is, like, say 75. We know she's between, like, 74 and 80. That's what Margaret tells us is her guess. So let's say 75. And in this book, when Margaret finds that page torn from Jane Eyre in Aurelius's bag, and she goes to Vida Winter's library to look for a book that she thinks it might come from, and she says she's looking for a book from the turn of the century. And we also know that Hester gets swapped for her copy of Jane Eyre. I think one of her books gets swapped for a copy of The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which is from 1898. So we know that there are books in the house from, like, around 1900, basically. We know there are books in the house from the very late 19th century. And Angelfield is not a house where you can imagine new books getting bought. Like, no one in that house is buying books, unless Miss Winter is slipping out to buy books, which doesn't seem that likely. It's a very, like, self-contained house. So if you think about it, no one has bought books in that house in Miss Winter's lifetime. I doubt Isabel and Charlie, growing up, anyone was buying books, because their father was a bit of a recluse. So as far as I can see it, I imagine no one has bought books in that house since Mathilde was alive, which dates Mathilde's death to, like, around 1900. Then Isabel gives birth to the twins when she is, like, 17, I think, because Charlie is 26. Charlie would have to be too young to have been conscripted for the First World War, which means Charlie must have been born after 1901. So I'm going to date, like, Mathilde's death to, like, 1910, let's say, which would mean that Isabel is 17 in 1927, which would date Miss Winter's birth to about that time. So let's say Miss Winter is born in 1927, which would actually date the kind of present day of the book to, like, 2002, which is when, like, a couple of years before the book was published. So actually I think it's more contemporary. I think it's actually set more contemporary than you think because of the dates and when the books would have been bought in house. However, like I can't make it fit around World War II and Ambrose not being conscripted. I haven't worked it out yet because I know Ambrose is in the army, and it would make sense if Ambrose joined the army in 1939, but that would push it all back earlier. But then why wouldn't Charlie have been? But also, I guess because Charlie seemed to have like a lot of mental health issues, maybe he wouldn't be allowed into the army anyway. So I don't know. The other thing I wanted to mention in terms of this book, which I'm curious to know your thoughts on, because one of the things I think is so clever in this book is the woman in Miss Winter's house, her sister/cousin, almost certainly her sister, who dies, who is called Emmeline, but probably isn't Emmeline. I don't think it's Emmeline. I think it's Adeline. And I think Miss Winter looks after Adeline all her life for the sake of her sister Emmeline, who is the one who died. That's what I think. But I'm curious to know if you think it is Emmeline. I'm curious to know what you think. Because it's really interesting, and the horror of her not knowing and not bearing to know after the fire. But at some point, maybe she would. But then if Adeline has been so changed by the fire that and by the death of her sister that the violence goes out of her. If you think about when Emmeline and Adeline are separated earlier on in the book, like Adeline just like loses, like she's not violent, she just like shuts herself down entirely, and that's how I feel like you can see the woman who is dying in Miss Winter's house as that Adeline who, after the loss of her sister, just shuts herself down and becomes passive. And I think it's Adeline. But do you think it's Emmeline? Because I don't remember. I think the first time I read it, I wasn't sure, but I think I've made up my mind now that I think it's Adeline. But I want to know what you think as well, because it's quite ambiguous, obviously, which I like. I like that too. So yeah, I feel like that's all I have to say. There's probably been quite a long, rambly video in a few little pieces, but not as many as I intended, but longer than I intended, so it's fine. I love this book a lot. I really hope that you guys taking part in the read along enjoyed it as well. It's such a wonderful, wonderful read, and it's so gripping, and I love the twist so well. I love the gothicness of it. I love the references to Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. Like, I just think it's so perfectly put together and so beautifully written, and I love it a lot. And I hope you guys did too. And we can have another chat in the comments and on the Goodreads page. And it's been really, really fun to host the read along and read it with lots of other people who are reading it for the first time as well, and like spot what their theories are and stuff like that. It's been really, really fun. I've seen lots of theories that there's only one child in the house, but none that there are three. So yeah. Okay, I think that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching and for taking part in the read along, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.